Some of our viewers who've sent festive poetry to Maxwell Lees can hear some of them tonight when Max presents Poetry of the People. That'll be about 1:30 tomorrow morning. Independent television for the north of England. Now it's news time at ITN.
The news from ITN.
Labour challenges the role of British ships in the Gulf. Security alert in Ulster as UDA man is buried. Liverpool break a record and go 10 points ahead. And at Kempton, desert orchid fails to bloom. Good evening. Labour are demanding a government statement on the role of the Royal Navy in the Gulf. Their Foreign Affairs spokesman, Mr. George Robertson, says Britain is being sucked into the Gulf conflict, and he wants to know whether the Navy's rules of engagement have been changed. In the last 2 days, the frigate HMS Scillas offered help to Norwegian and South Korean ships attacked by Iran. And tonight, Scilla is said to be leading a new convoy, including Saudi and Panamanian ships into the Gulf. This report by David Glencorse in London.
Today in the Gulf, the stricken South Korean freighter Hyundai 7 was towed back to port still on fire after being attacked by 3 Iranian gunboats. The rescue by the Royal Navy of crewmen from the freighter is being seen by some as further evidence of Britain allowing itself to become enmeshed in the Gulf conflict. Labour's George Robertson is agreeing that Britain should assist vessels in distress, but he says the Royal Navy is completely unsuited to such a role.
The British Navy are there solely and simply to accompany ships with British flags and are not there to act as Gulf policemen for the whole of the merchant marine in that area. And if that's what they're being expected to do, it's a role that they can't do, and it's a role that should only be done by the United Nations. And it's time the British government called the Russians bluff and decided that we should have a United Nations presence in the Gulf, and it should be quite deliberately under a UN flag.
Tonight, a Foreign Office spokesman said that ministers were now discussing a report of the rescue operation. But it was emphasized that Britain had taken part in what was a humanitarian gesture toward a ship in distress. And the Ministry of Defence is tonight insisting that the rules of engagement have not changed. It was part of international law that a ship respond to another vessel's distress call. The ministry wouldn't comment on reports that the Royal Navy frigate Scilla is back in the Gulf alongside tankers from Saudi Arabia and Panama.
Israel says its troops captured 3 Palestinian guerrillas as they tried to slip into the country wearing Israeli army uniforms. They fought a gun battle after crossing the 200-mile border with Jordan in what's said to be the first clash in the Jordan Valley for 10 years. The Palestine Liberation Front said the raid was intended to show support for Palestinian protests in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and Gaza. 5 U.S. Navy sailors have been injured in the grenade attack in a bar on Barcelona. The building was badly damaged by the explosion. One of the sailors, who were on shore leave, was seriously injured. Witnesses say 2 grenades were thrown into the bar. So far, no one has claimed responsibility. In Northern Ireland, thousands of loyalists turned out for the funeral of John McMichael, the deputy leader of the paramilitary Ulster Defence Association, who was killed by an IRA bomb. Tonight, security forces are on the alert for revenge attacks.
There was a massive police turnout in Lisbon to prevent any paramilitary show of strength. Security forces feared that the funeral of the UDA leader would be marked by an appearance by loyalist paramilitaries who have threatened revenge for this latest killing. Even a uniformed loyalist band was told by police not to join the cortege, and they left by taxi. UDA officials said there would be no paramilitary display, and eventually a lone piper led the funeral procession. "5,000 people filled the streets to mourn John McMichael, who died in his booby-trapped car. Amongst them were Dr. Ian Paisley and Mr. James Molyneux, leaders of the Democratic and official Unionist parties. Andy Tirry, chairman of the UDA and close friend of the murdered man, helped carry the coffin through the crowded streets of a Lisbon housing estate. Policemen lined the route ahead to ensure there was no trouble. At the graveside, there were emotional scenes as the UDA man's wife paid her last respects. Security forces kept a discreet distance, but will remain on alert with the threat of retaliation. Terry Lloyd, ITN, Northern Ireland.
Mr. Gordon Wilson, whose daughter Marie was killed by the IRA bombing at Enniskillen, says he and his family were moved by the Queen's mention of them in her Christmas broadcast. And in a radio interview, Mr. Wilson said he backed the Queen's hopes for reconciliation.
Her words of forgiveness and tolerance through love hopefully will be listened and acted upon by many people, and I would see her message as the only way towards peace in Ireland.
Police investigating the corner shop killings of two elderly sisters in Birmingham are looking for a bogus water board official who called on them 9 days before they died.
Detectives hunting for the killer of Edna and Alice Rowley want to interview the bogus water board official who visited their shop on the 14th of December. They believe he could be involved in the killings and at least want the chance to rule him out of their inquiries.
We know that someone using the pretense of being a water board official gained access to the Greswold stores. Edna, it seems, very quickly dispatched him without argument. So anyone else that has had bogus officials, either of a water board or any other deception, again, we'd be very interested to hear from them.
The sisters were cat lovers and in the habit of taking their pet for an evening stroll on a lead. The murder squad want to know if one of them went out on Tuesday night. It would help pin down the time of the murders. Detectives who searched the corner shop the sisters had run for 50 years believe the killer stole money from the cash register and carried their Christmas presents away in a brown leather suitcase. This luggage label was left behind at the scene. Finding the case could lead to the murderer. Police think the killings were premeditated and they're hoping that even other criminals will be sickened by them and come forward to help.
The Soviet news agency TASS says relations between Britain and the Soviet Union are now better than at any time since the Second World War. TASS said a period of animated exchanges has come and Soviet-British trade is developing successfully. The agency says the improvement was underlined at the Bryce-Norton meeting between Mrs. Thatcher and the Soviet leader Mr. Gorbachev, and it praised Mrs. Thatcher's positive role over the Soviet-American treaty to scrap intermediate-range nuclear missiles. And now, with the Boxing Day soccer and the rest of today's sport, here's Mark Austin.
Liverpool are tonight 10 points clear at the top of the First Division after a 3-0 victory at Oxford. It's a win that means they're unbeaten in 20 league games this season, a club record. With one major bookmaker, Liverpool are now 8-1 on for the Championship. Extraordinary odds with the season not yet half over.
After a hangover half hour, Liverpool put together a devastating burst. This is their 8th corner in as many minutes, and Oxford were united no more. It wasn't one of Aldridge's classier goals, but the home fans could only look back to a year ago when he was doing the same in an Oxford shirt. These days they're a shadow of the team which won the Milk Cup. Today they had a short, threatening spell early in the second half. The half chances they created, half-heartedly thrown away. Liverpool, though, aren't wasting anything. A break from nowhere left them with not just a spare man, but with Barnes, probably the most accurate player in the league. It was then down to how many the league leaders felt like scoring. McMahon hit the third from way out. It could have been a fluke, but the way Liverpool are playing, anything's possible. There were no more goals, which was nothing to do with Oxford's defence, more Beardsley's misfortune. Peter Staunton, ITN Sport at the Manor Ground.
Brian Clough's Nottingham Forest are emerging as the side that could threaten Liverpool. Today they beat Arsenal 2-0, their first win at Highbury in 22 years, and moved above them into second place.
At Highbury, Arsenal knew they had to play well against Nottingham Forest to stay in second place, and in a generally scrappy first half, they had the best of the play. Niall Quinn, in his first game of the season, had an early chance, just the first of many wasted opportunities by the Gunners. Forest took the lead with a 39th minute goal, Steve Chettle's kick finding Arsenal keeper John Lukic hopelessly off his line. Terry Wilson putting it away. In the second half, the story was much the same. Arsenal wasting good opportunities, their strikers seemingly unable to finish. Their best chance came 7 minutes from time, Steve Chettle handling the ball under pressure from Niall Quinn, but captain Kenny Sansom's penalty hit the bar. 4 minutes later, at the other end of the field, a hapless Lukic brought down Tommy Gaynor. The referee ignored the protests, and Forest captain Stuart Pearce gave Sansom a lesson, making the result safe. So, a Boxing Day bonus for Forest, but bad news for Arsenal, still minus Charlie Nicholas. Manager George Graham says he wants more goals. Today, just one would have been a start. Simon Marks, ITN Sport, Highbury.
Elsewhere, 2 Adrian Heath goals moved the champions up the table into 4th place, but still 13 points behind their Merseyside rivals. Norwich's new signing, Robert Fleck, started repaying his £500,000 move from Glasgow Rangers by scoring the opening goal. They now move off the bottom of the First Division. And in Scotland, Joe Miller's goal, a minute from time, kept Celtic on top of the Premier Division, ahead of Aberdeen on goal difference. There was a big upset in the King George VI steeplechase at Kempton. The favourite Desert Orchid, who's won the hearts of thousands of racegoers, was beaten into 2nd place by Nupsala, an outsider from France. Desert Orchid was in front with 3 fences to go, but then faded.
And Desert Orchid looks beaten, forgiven to get back in 3rd place. They come down towards the 2nd last.
The pace had proved too much for the favourite, and when 2nd placed Forgiven Forget fell at the last, the French challenger romped home by 15 lengths.
Desert Orchid is left 2nd, but this King George VI round chase, and at the line, Nupsala is the winner. Nupsala the winner.
First Nupsala 25-1, second Desert Orchid, evens favourite, third Golden Friend 20-1. One of yachting's most colourful events, the Sydney to Hobart race, began today, and there's a good chance of a record time. Strong winds are forecast throughout the 2.5-day event. Tom Evans at ITN reports.
The Sydney seafront was crammed with spectators as nearly 160 yachts set off on the first leg of the 630-mile race to Tasmania. There were so many entries that the race had to be divided into 2 sections for the first time. In the main race, the Australian yacht Sovereign, the largest of its kind in the world, built up an early lead. It's the only race she hasn't won. Last year, she was leading until problems with her sails forced her to retire. There were collisions too as yachts jostled for the best position. But as the fleet headed south, it was Sovereign that set the pace.
And that's the news tonight. Just time to remind you that there'll be a special ITN programme tomorrow when Julia Somerville reviews the highlights of the Royal Year. ITN's The Royal Year is on ITV tomorrow at 2. But now, from all of us here, good night.
And the regional weather until 6 p.m. tomorrow. After a fine, mild night, tomorrow will be cloudy with rain soon reaching all parts from the southwest. This will last well into the afternoon before clearing. Temperatures will reach 10 degrees Celsius, that's 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds will be moderate to fresh and southwesterly. That's the forecast in the north until 6 p.m. tomorrow.
Tonight on ITV, Agatha Christie's classic Murder with Mirrors.
Kill him, he's crazy. Oh my God, you really suspect him?
I suspect everybody.
I don't believe any of us actually thought we'd be needing an alibi.
Yes, I'm sorry if all this offends you, but there is obviously a killer running around.
Deaths that defy investigation. Miss Marple confronts Murder with Mirrors. Tonight at 11:45 on ITV.
And more fun and frolics next with the Dame Edna Christmas Experience.